Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In the final episode of this week, we are looking into Uzbekistan's latest exercise in democracy, or, well, something democracy adjacent, shall we say. On the 27th of October, Uzbekistan held elections for its parliament's lower house and local governments. They took place without any protests, any public tension. Sounds like democracy, right? Well, hold your applause, because these elections were about as competitive as a boxing match where both opponents are secretly rooting for each other. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more about this phenomenon.
Uzbekistan's Liberal Democratic Party claimed victory in parliamentary elections, winning 42.7% of the vote and 64 seats in the 150-member legislative chamber. Voter turnout was nearly 75% of the approximately 19.9 million Uzbek citizens eligible to vote. This election marked the first time that Uzbekistan used a mixed electoral system, which includes both majoritarian single-member districts and proportional representation through party lists. The runner-up in the election was the Democratic Party, which won 19.3% of the vote and 29 seats. A total of 5 parties gained representation in the lower house, all of which held seats in the previous parliament. Uzbekistan's Liberal Democratic Party, or OzLidep, founded by then-President Islam Karimov in 2003, has remained a dominant political force, supporting current President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who has won elections since taking office in 2016. In Uzbekistan's bicameral system, members of the Senate are not directly elected. Instead, 65 senators are chosen in indirect, secret votes by regional councils and appointed by the president to represent various sectors of society, including science, the arts and civil service.
And now we're zooming in on Tashkent to take a look at the issue in greater detail. Let's begin with some results, shall we? Uzbekistan's Liberal Democratic Party, the president's favorite, won gold, gaining them a solid 64 seats in the 150-seat chamber. But don't worry, this wasn't a one-party show. There were others in the mix too, like the National Revival Party, the People's Democratic Party, the Social Democratic Party, and the Ecological Party. All got a slice of the pie and seats in parliament. But here's the thing, none of them are really opposition parties. In fact, Uzbekistan's parliament is a lot like an extended family dinner. Everyone is there, but they all agree with grandpa by the end of the night. So why go through all this charade at all? Why have elections if there is no real contest, no fiery debates, no challenging ideas? Well, that's where the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, comes in. Their mission to observe Uzbekistan's electoral process wasn't exactly thrilled with what they found. According to their report, this election was riddled with systemic limitations on freedoms of association, assembly and expression. They also pointed out a lack of real political competition, as well as some handy tricks like multiple voting and restrictions on ballot secrecy. Basically, it was democracy on training wheels, and the wheels haven't been upgraded in a long time. And yet, in true reformer fashion, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev's government did make some improvements. They made a big show of allowing international observers and even increased the number of women running for office. 40% of candidates were women, which is genuinely impressive and a big step forward for the country. But don't pop the champagne just yet. For all these reforms, the core of the system hasn't budged. Uzbekistan's power structure is still more interested in control than competition, in stability than unpredictability, and in maintaining the appearance of reform without risking any actual change. Now, Uzbekistan has its reasons for this. The government wants to modernize the economy and keep the engine running smoothly, especially since Uzbekistan's population is growing at an astounding rate. The average age here is just under 29. And with that youthful energy comes new aspirations, demands, and yes, frustrations. But what makes the situation fascinating is how Uzbekistan has positioned itself on the international stage. It's not trying to become a shining beacon of democracy, but it is making moves to look reformist enough to gain some good PR and, ideally, avoid harsh scrutiny. It is as if Uzbekistan is saying to the West, look, we're opening up, just not too much, okay? And you know what? It is working. Observers saw the election, criticized it, and yet here we are, still talking about progress. It's almost as if Uzbekistan has become a master of the soft pivot. Just reform enough to keep international observers interested, but not so much that it actually risks internal instability. And let's not pretend we all forgot President Mirziyoyev has altered constitution to allow him to stay in office until 2037. The country's rapid population growth, high levels of economic inequality, and the threat of radicalism are all simmering beneath the surface. Uzbekistan's government is essentially running an ongoing experiment. They are testing how far they can push reform without creating real democracy, seeing how much freedom they can introduce without giving up control. But what happens when a new generation raised in an increasingly open world demands a say in how they are governed? Well, only time will tell. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Panea, board member at the Caspian Policy Center. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So it appears that the Uzbekistan situation is proof that you may have all the parties you want. It still doesn't mean that you have true democracy, right?
I mean, absolutely. This is the illusion of an alternative party system here, and it's always been that way. Technically, you can register a party if you want. They've never registered a genuine opposition party to this date. In fact, there was a loophole where for a while you could run as an independent, and once somebody that was an opposition figure tried to run as an independent, they closed that hole too. So now you can only be nominated if you're from a registered political party. There's 5 registered political parties, and they are all supporters of the president and his policies.
So is it safe to say that all these parties are basically satellite groupings to the ruling party at the center, which ironically enough, I mean, they are calling themselves liberal Democrats. It's probably safe to say they're not really Democrats and certainly not liberal, are they?
No, I mean, in no way. With the party's policies, their platforms are almost identical. When you have these parliamentary elections, they get out and explain what they're going to do. It's 95, 96% is pretty much the same, and it's all in support of the president's policies. There's always, every party, out of obligation, no doubt, has 1 or 2 things that they say they're going to do that differ from the other parties, just to, again, reinforce the illusion that these are actually 5 separate parties that are each offering something unique to the voter.
So when looking at the situation in the country, would you say that, despite all the qualms that we may have, as representatives, of the West, of, the democratic world, that there is some attempt at reforming the system by Shavkat Mirziyoyev, especially compared to his predecessor?
Yes, well, certainly if you are comparing it to his predecessor, the first president of Uzbekistan, and I should remind at this point that the current president was the former president's prime minister for 13 years. So this will give you an idea of how much the policies really were ever going to be able to shift in Uzbekistan. He has done some things, the current president, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, has done some things which are, you could call reforms. There's no doubt about it. He certainly eased up on persecution of religious groups. He let out some aging political prisoners from jail. I mean late 60s and 70s, beyond the ability to do any harm to the country anymore. Economically, he's done a lot of things to reform the country. But of course, this is something that he would have had to do in any case. Uzbekistan was close to being an isolationist country under the first president. They had cut ties with a lot of their neighboring countries, and they're a double landlocked country. So if you don't have good relations with your neighbors, it makes it very, very difficult to trade. So he's done some reforms. And if we look at the previous regime, you'd have to say things are better, but there's still quite a long ways to go. And certainly in terms of the domestic political system, we just don't see very much difference from the previous regime.
Well, okay, suppose you actually live in Uzbekistan. Compared to countries which are even lower on the democracy scale, like, for example, Belarus, how does life really look like for a man who, say, well, they might not be a revolutionary, but may wish to express their opinions a bit, perhaps some criticism of the authorities? Would that even fly in Uzbekistan, or would you basically have members of the security service knocking at your door and asking what you're doing?
It is possible, I suppose, but I mean, only in a very narrow sense. The president is famous for calling on people, and certainly the media, to expose corruption. And so if you are trying to expose the corruption of a local official, you might have some success. That said, there have been bloggers who have tried to do it. And in some cases, it's helped to change that individual official. But in more cases, it's ended up with the blogger getting in deep trouble, usually on some other charges, not because they criticized a local official or pointed out his corruption on one of their posts, but because they some other bogus charges are put up against them, fraud, extortion, something like that. Which is clearly not true, but it has the effect of at least temporarily nullifying that particular source of information from broadcasting any more bad things about the government. So, it's really a fine line. When you were talking about reforms, I should credit the media with trying to push the envelope, so to speak, as much as possible. I mean, once the new president came in, he said, he wanted the media to report on this, and they did. And they quickly ran up against walls in different areas. I mean, there are borders about things about which you can report, and certainly one of those is reporting on anything to do with the president or his family. Any shady deals or corruption that they might be involved in is clearly off limits. That's also true of top officials in the country, and everyone knows that. So if you've been growing up in Uzbekistan for the last 33 plus years, when they've been independent, you might have a sense that the hand of the law is a little bit easier on you than it was, but your possibilities for criticizing the government in the end of the day are really not much different than they were 20 years ago.
So let's flip the discussion on its head for a bit, because we in the West, we have this sort of comfort of being able to judge other countries from a distance. But when we take into account cultural differences, and this is probably something that the Uzbek government is also trying to use as an argument, is it possible to expect the changes leading towards a more democratic path, to take place at the same pace as everywhere else, especially given that Central Asia generally, it's not like it's reverting from a state of European-style democracy. They used to be parts of the Soviet Union, now they are carving their own path. But basically, would you say that there is enough of a democratic tradition in the region to even provide any sort of role model for this society to adopt? I'm just asking because, the West used to have an idea that you can transplant democracy anywhere. With Iraq, for example, didn't really work out. And now we probably might consider a slightly more cautious approach when it comes to judging other cultures and countries, if they are not engaging in any sort of aggressive behavior, of course.
I'm going to agree with that. The first time I was in Uzbekistan, it was a Soviet republic. So I've been going there for, more than 30 years now. I've talked with people. I lived in villages for a while. We had nothing to do but talk about things. And so I understand their knowledge of politics. And of course, they came out of the Soviet heritage. So a lot of these things are the concepts of democracy are very unfamiliar with them. Obviously, we've had a whole generation that's passed since 1990, the first time I went there. But there's this idea of that elections are always going to be staged, and that the government knows in advance what they want. Even now, when we got to the point where a whole generation has passed, people they look and they see that it has all the trappings of being a pluralistic system when they have these elections. But at the same time, everyone understands that you really can't affect change through politics in the country. So, and when you talk to people about what democracy means, everyone has a different idea. There's a tendency to confuse capitalism with democracy. What they thought was democracy was having more wealth than you had at that personal time, being able to buy a car, being able to buy a big screen TV, something like that. That was part of democracy, which it wasn't. The idea that the people can participate in the system and make the rules sounds very good, but they don't have much practice with that. Now, the fault I have with what's happening in Uzbekistan, admittedly, there's not cultivated soil at the moment for them to switch to the kind of democracy that we have in the West. But the problem is that the government is not allowing them to educate themselves and get themselves up to a level where they can understand, the fine points and the intricacies of a democratic system, and understand what their rights are within that system and how they can participate positively in it and affect change at the same time. So that's really the problem. No, they don't have the heritage for democracy. But the real issue is the fact that they're not being given the chance to educate themselves about what it means to be a democratic society and the role of an individual in a democratic society.
So for the time being, it seems that President Shavkat Mirziyoyev will not have to worry about any sort of authentic competition on the political scene, which of course is not something that will last forever. Nevertheless, as you said, it is a long road ahead. Bruce Pannier was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for the invitation.
And now moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. US News and World Report has stirred global debate with its 2024 ranking of the world's strongest militaries, placing Russia at the top despite ongoing criticism of its performance in Ukraine. Known for its influential college and university rankings, US News expanded its scope to assess military power as part of a broader Best Countries survey, which ranks nations based on perceived power and influence.
US News and World Report's 2024 survey of the world's strongest militaries ranks Russia as having the globe's most powerful army. This comes amid continuing criticism from analysts regarding Russia's performance in Ukraine, where its forces have been described as poorly trained and led. While Russia tops the military list, it ranks only 36th out of 89 in the overall Best Country category, far behind other nations with similar military rankings. Following Russia, the survey places the United States, Israel, China and South Korea as the next most powerful militaries. North Korea, despite recently sending troops to assist Russian efforts in Ukraine, is notably absent from the rankings. Other countries in the military rankings also raise eyebrows, such as Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, which are ranked 19th and 22nd respectively, despite their lack of military involvement.
Now, Russia's Human Rights Council chief has defended the country's crackdown on dissent amid the ongoing war in Ukraine, rejecting accusations of political repression. Under a sweeping ban on criticism of the war, those who oppose President Vladimir Putin's policies face exile, imprisonment, or even death.
The head of Russia's Presidential Human Rights Council, Valery Fadeyev, defends Moscow's sweeping crackdown on dissent, describing the measures as sanitary actions necessary as the country pursues its military campaign in Ukraine. He rejected claims of political repression, saying Russia's campaign against opposition voices was aimed at safeguarding national interests, not silencing political dissent. While critics of the Kremlin have either been exiled, imprisoned or even killed, officials have justified their actions as necessary to counter perceived domestic threats. Hundreds of thousands of Russians have fled the country since the invasion of Ukraine, while those who remain face criminal charges. Human rights monitors report that Russia has opened more than 9,000 cases against people accused of discrediting the army, with many imprisoned for their opposition.
Kyrgyz President Sadir Japarov has announced plans to revise Kyrgyzstan's national anthem, aiming to create a version that he says better aligns with the country's evolving identity. Japarov has expressed that the country's current anthem, which was adopted more than 3 decades ago, lacks the patriotic fervor needed to inspire today's Kyrgyz citizens.
Kyrgyzstan might soon change its anthem. The country's president Sadir Japarov argues that the nation needs a new one that embodies its rich history and strength. He also emphasizes the need for a symbol that reflects the spirit of modern Kyrgyz society. This proposed revision follows Japarov's recent changes to the national flag, a move that has drawn mixed reactions. Japarov's focus on national symbols had been central to his populist approach, aimed at uniting the public behind a strengthened Kyrgyz identity. Opposition figures, however, have questioned the need for such symbolic changes. Critics argue that the government should prioritize addressing social and economic issues rather than changing national emblems.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.